Hello, I'm Dan Perry and this is my Master's of Science dissertation, The Hiding Curriculum Toward the Development of LGBTQ+ Curriculum in Higher Education. Chapter 3, Get a Room, the Deconstruction of Neoliberal Capitalism, Queer Anarchists, Sexual Citizenship, Queer Temporary Autonomous Zones and Higher Education. This presentation is called Education, Space and Queer Autonomous Zones. Over to the overview. In this video we are looking at Education and Space, Queer Autonomous Zones and a part which I've called Untitled, and it is actually untitled. Continuing on from the previous video, where I was looking at counterpublics and the idea of intervention in heteronormative spaces and queer counterpublics, I would argue that higher education would fall between these two approaches as being heteronormative space but seemingly being LGBTQ friendly. Therefore, it will require intervention in the heteronormative space, but at the same time form a counterpublic approach to create a new sexual citizenship through communities of practice. Queer counterpublics, by engaging and allowing queer and queered sexualities, allow space for dissemination and readership of discourses that are in conflict with and are resistant to hetero-homo-normativity. However, Jefferson 2010 acknowledges when the counterpublic discourse has been established, counter-discourse may emerge, but may create a new hegemonic monolith, making it hard to disrupt the power structure which it has originated in. In addition, Brown 2010 has suggested that binaries are too easily created between homonormative and authentic, transgressive queer space. Brown further believes that we need to recognise complicity in these spaces, as this can reproduce normative principles and practices that reconstruct power and hierarchies that the space seeks to undermine. However, I still believe that effective counterpublic interventions could be created within the higher education classroom through temporary autonomous zones, which I will now briefly explore. Jefferson 2010 describes the queer autonomous zone as being a flexible space for people to engage in a direct democracy, that all members are encouraged to participate. Queer autonomous zones are involved in enabling discourses of intersectional anti-oppressive politics. Further, the interactions within the space can allow sustainable social relations to be cultivated. Cornelia Schlohauer further explains a temporary autonomous zone in her interview with Schumann. Schlohauer refers to the anarchist writer Hakim Bey that wrote a book on the idea of temporary autonomous zones in 1991. The prefix temporary, with my own emphasis, is in reference to the fact that Bey believes that the autonomous zone is not permanent but as a moment in which change could occur. It is ongoing and not stalling, from Schumann 2014. I would refer the reader, or in this case the watcher of the video, to the second chapter and remind them that curriculum is defined as a racing forwards by Barnhart and Steinmetz, and chronobiopolitics by Freeman in this case as the synchronized embodiment of time, which could be a moment that is meant to be economically productive. What if we were able to alter chronobiopolitics through temporary autonomous zones, which is what Schlohauer describes as moments that eluded incorporation into capitalism and commodification, creating opportunities to resist the dominant narratives. And that's in Schumann 2014. What if, in temporary autonomous zones, we were able to allow a queered community of practice through the counterpublic from which we could cultivate creativity, sharing of ideas, knowledge, and empower, rather than the end result being economic production? After all, Jefferson 2010 believes that queer autonomous zones are based on mutual respect, consent, sexual liberation, and non-normativity, in which people engage in open-ended processes of developing alternative ways of being, feeling, thinking, engaging, acting, and becoming liberated. I've discussed some of the ideals of queer anarchy and their stance against universalism and normativity, and for inclusion and democratic methods. I've explored the idea of sexual citizenship, but have acknowledged that to be a citizen, there are inclusion and exclusion dynamics to participation. I turn my attention to how to disrupt hetero-homonormative spaces through intervention and counterpublics, believing that higher education fits both descriptions. Brown 2009 reminds us that the spaces that we create can reproduce dominant structures and normalization. However, I argue that counter-public interventions could be achieved through temporary autonomous zones. I then use two different but interrelated definitions of temporary autonomous zones. These are Jefferson 2010 and Schumann 2014, noting that there are time constructions in Schlohauer's description in Schumann's 2014 interview with them. I then re-establish these time constructions back to the word curriculum and chronobiopolitics. Finally, I suggest that it may be possible to alter the course of chronobiopolitics from the economically driven through queer temporary autonomous zones and queer communities of practice. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to our final video, temporary summaries and inconclusive conclusions, and I'll see you then. Bye.